Good morning, Belize, and others joining us from across the globe. We welcome you back to our second annual Culture Symposium. We have had so many great presentations these past few days, and today we'll only continue this exciting knowledge exchange. We would like to invite all of our viewers to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can also check out our website at heritagebelize.org or check out our YouTube channel. We welcome any donations to support our many initiatives. We are a volunteer led and community driven, non governmental, and non profit organization. We are a registered 501c3 in the US, so all donations are tax deductible. If you cannot donate, you can also support us by following us on social media and sharing our content. Thank you for taking the time to support us, and thank you for being with us here today. We hope you will continue with us on our journey to bring culture and heritage to the forefront of sustainability here in Belize and abroad. I would also like to remind our viewers that if at any point during the sessions you have a question for the presenters, please feel free to write them into the comment section and we will do our very best to address your questions during the designated question and answer session. The symposium is all about dialogue, so please do not be shy and join the conversation. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker for this morning, which was prepared by Ms. Stephanie D. Ortiz Sola, the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for World Monuments Fund, and Ms. Ellie Marie Garcia Cosme, who is the Program Coordinator for the World Monuments Fund. We are joined this morning by Miss Ella Marie. Welcome, Miss Ella Marie.
Thank you so much.
And a very warm hello.
Oh, yes, I just want to say thank you so much for having me this morning. And as you will see, Stephanie's will be pre-recorded as she's traveling at the moment, but we are very happy to be here and to participate in the Culture Symposium. So a big thank you to Heritage Education Network Belize. And of course, I will be here throughout the whole day and will be more than happy to answer any questions. So I look forward to the presentations of the day and would like to pass it to Stephanie's presentation.
To everyone joining the Culture Symposium. We'd like to thank the Heritage Education Network Belize for inviting World Monuments Fund to say a few introductory words on today's session, which is focused on Lamanai. My name is Stephanie Ortiz. I am the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for World Monuments Fund, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ellie Marie Garcia Cosme, who is our Program Coordinator. Since Lamanai was included on the 2022 World Monuments Watch, we want to take a few minutes to tell you a bit about World Monuments Fund and what it means that the site is included on our watch program. So World Monuments Fund is the leading organization devoted to safeguarding the world's most treasured places. Our mission through the act of heritage preservation is to enrich people's lives and build mutual understanding across cultures and communities. Our headquarters are in New York City, and we have representatives and affiliates around the world, including offices in London, Peru, India, Spain, and Portugal. Since our founding in 1965, World Monuments Fund has been engaged at more than 700 sites in 112 countries. We partner with local communities, funders, and governments to develop heritage conservation projects of all kinds. Our projects cover a wide range of activities like physical conservation or restoration, training, and advocacy to promote adequate and sustainable stewardship. and to address global challenges such as imbalanced tourism, underrepresented heritage, and climate change. We understand heritage conservation as a means to create a more resilient and inclusive society. The World Monuments Watch is our main advocacy program that seeks to spotlight and catalyze action at sites facing challenges or presenting opportunities of direct relevance to our global society. The Watch was created in 1996 as a biennial program with a bottom-up approach. That means every 2 years, nominations come to us for heritage sites from all over the world. Nominators can be individuals, professionals, government agencies, and civil society groups, and they are the ones who bring these sites, their challenges and opportunities to our attention. The Watch helps us, at the same time, take a pulse of the heritage field and the challenges that impact heritage sites around the world. After a rigorous review process that takes several months, 25 sites are selected for the 2-year program. And World Monuments Fund then collaborates closely with the nominators and with other local partners to develop and implement projects as funding allows. Our goal is to raise and build community through the Watch. Lamanai was included in the 2022 World Monuments Watch along with 24 other sites, 25 sites in total. It was selected from a pool of 227 sites that we received from 77 countries and territories around the world. It was selected because of the strength of the nomination, the site's unquestionable significance, and the incredible potential of its cultural landscape to tell a broader narrative, tracing connections from the Maya period to the colonial and the post-colonial periods, all within a single site. The 2022 World Monuments Watch represents 24 countries, and its sites, the 25 sites, cover over 13,000 years of history. The 25 watch sites demonstrate how the global challenges, and as I mentioned before, these are climate change, underrepresented heritage, and imbalanced tourism, how these global challenges are experienced at a local level, while pointing toward community-driven solutions that are replicable elsewhere in the world. For the next 2 years, we at World Monuments Fund are very excited to collaborate with the nominators of the site, Heritage Education Network Belize, and with the Institute of Archaeology to develop a project at Lamanai that fosters community inclusion in tourism management and planning and enhances the integration of post-Maya heritage to the site's narrative. We look forward to the day's presentations, and we look forward to working with you at Lamanai. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz Sola and Ms. Garcia Cosme. And now we have our second keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Melissa Badillo, the director of the Institute of Archaeology, NICH. Dr. Melissa Badillo is the current director of the Belize Institute of Archaeology, with the responsibility for overseeing all aspects of the management, protection, and preservation of Belize's archaeological and cultural resources, including 14 archaeological reserves open for daily public visitations. She is also responsible for coordinating and collaborating with numerous researchers who annually conduct archaeological research projects across the country. Dr. Badillo first joined the former Department of Archaeology as a conservation officer with responsibility for providing administrative assistance to archaeological research projects. Over the years, Dr. Badillo transitioned to the archaeologist post after having completed her BA in anthropology from the University of Central Florida. Since then, she has served as coordinator for the annual Belize Archaeology Symposium and as a member of the editorial board for the annual publication Research Reports in Belizean Archaeology. In 2015, she completed her master's in heritage management from the University of Birmingham in the UK, and in 2021, she completed her doctoral degree in anthropology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Her PhD dissertation focused on the archaeological site of Santa Rita, located in the Corozal district, where she analyzed the associated artifact assemblage of selected household groups to determine the functions served by individual buildings and provide insight on the organization of post classic period households. Dr. Melissa Badillo is the first Belizean woman to successfully complete a PhD in anthropology and to serve in the capacity of director at the Institute of Archaeology. I give you Dr. Melissa Badillo.
Good morning. It is my honor as the director of the Belize Institute of Archaeology to be part of this year's KULCHA Symposium organized by the Heritage Education Network Belize. I implore you to think deeply on the purpose of this event, understanding that collaboration is the only way that our cultural identity as Belizeans can be preserved. The Institute of Archaeology is committed to heritage preservation and is grateful for HENB's nomination of Lamanai into the World Monument Fund watch list. This nomination aids in raising awareness about Lamanai's cultural heritage and the unwavering need as a country to ensure its protection. Lamanai was designated as an archaeological reserve in 1985. The reserve is situated on the west bank of the New River Lagoon and covers approximately 958.5 acres, within which lies the ancient Maya city of Lamanai. The reserve attracts thousands of tourists each year, both local and foreign, and its immense cultural heritage and archaeological and ecological value is undeniable. Within the boundaries of the reserve, one can observe 3 periods of Belize's cultural occupation that adds to the totality of our Belizean identity. Based on radiocarbon dates, Lamanai was first occupied as early as 1500 BC and eventually developed into a major political and economic center of the region by the Middle Preclassic. As the political status of the site developed, it became the capital of a region or province known as Zulwinicob. Being of immense status in the region, Lamanai participated in the complex trading network across Mesoamerica and due to its position on the New River, likely provided a link for the movement of resources between the Caribbean coast and inland sites. These trade relationships flourished in Lamanai long after the period of change that is often categorized as the decline of the Maya civilization. The term decline does not accurately define what was occurring in the Maya civilization during the 10th century, which can more closely be classified as a shift in their political and social structures. Many centers in the southern lowlands were abandoned and political and economic power shifted to the northern lowlands. Lamanai differentiates itself from most other major classic sites of the region in that occupation of the site persisted through the Terminal Classic into the Post-Classic and continued well into the contact period. Lamanai's occupational history offers a fertile location for archaeological research on the post-classic period and provides insight on how the differences in governance between sites may have influenced their success during the Terminal Classic. Evidence suggests that not only did occupation of Lamanai continue into the post-classic, but that it included large-scale construction and use that required a sizable labor force. Temple N109, constructed in the Classic period, saw constant maintenance and ceremonial use that persisted into the post-Classic. Between 900 and 950 AD, a lone ball court was constructed, neighboring the pre-Classic structure N1043, also referred to as the High Temple. As previously mentioned, Lamanai partook in regional trade. Excavations of the ball court uncovered, among other artifacts, 9.6 cubic centimeters of mercury, likely linked to trade with the site of Copan in Honduras. As political power shifted north during the post-Classic, Lamanai was not alienated, but retained trade with sites in the northern lowlands. The ancient Maya never fully utilized metal, but by the post-Classic, metal objects began to make an appearance at Lamanai. At least 27 copper objects, including bells, rings, and other adornments, were found at Lamanai, possibly originating from western Mexico. Lamanai saw continual occupation up until the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors and clergy. Spain's effort to Christianize the Yucatan led priests into the interior of what is now Belize. The first contact between the Spanish and the Maya of Lamanai is unknown, but continuous contact is indicated with the emergence of Spanish churches near the site. Records show that the first church was built during the 1550s, and by the 1560s, another church would be erected. Based on historic documents, we know that by 1640, one of these churches was burnt down, and the Maya of Lamanai had allied themselves with those from Tipu against colonialism. Excavations of the churches have yielded caches of Maya religious significance deliberately placed within sacred spaces of the churches. Based on archaeological interpretation, Lamanai provides room for a re-imaging of the process of colonization. According to Dr. Elizabeth Graham, archaeology at Lamanai has provided a more nuanced picture of cultural change in the region that grants some agency to the Maya involved. The British occupation of what is now Belize followed a different strategy than Spain's, but it included reusing the spaces around Lamanai. Around the 1830s, Hyde, Hodge and Company was granted a 200-acre plot under the Indian Church Plantation Grant to plant sugarcane and build a mill. The estate was later purchased by the British Honduras Company Limited and eventually bought by the Belize Estate and Produce Company in 1883. Today, the remnants of centuries of occupation are visible at Lamanai. Occupation that includes 3 distinct cultures who left behind a sophisticated civilization with complex structures of stone, frontier churches constructed during times of regional change, and a sugar mill tied to the evolution of an industrial revolution. The nature of the site being classified as a reserve in 1985 also pushes back against increasing land clearing in the area for farmland. According to the Belize Tropical Forest Studies, the area is known for its biodiversity and hosts more than 150 species of mammals, 540 species of birds, 151 species of amphibians and reptiles, nearly 600 species of freshwater and marine fishes, and over 3,000 species of vascular plants. The Lamanai Archaeological Reserve therefore functions as an important ecological green zone for faunal inhabitations of the area. Today, we will be treated with presentations on heritage, current research on Lamanai, and the relationship between the reserve and adjacent communities. As we look closely at these topics, the Institute of Archaeology is hopeful that we can attain more support from both the Belizean and international community in our mandate to protect and preserve Belize's heritage. We encourage you to enjoy Day 3 of the KULCHA Symposium, and we thank Heritage Education Network Belize for creating a space where research is accessible to everyone, and we congratulate them in their efforts in promoting heritage education.
Thank you, Dr. Melissa Badillo, for those words this morning. Our first thematic session for this morning looks at global heritage management practices. Through community-based management initiatives from Rwanda to comparative practices from Australia and New Zealand, and emerging lessons from Belize and Guatemala, we explore the broader impact of archaeological heritage spaces. Looking to research practiced in global spaces, we see the interconnectedness of heritage experiences as we all work to create innovative solutions in our own communities and countries. We are pleased to present research practiced in global spaces for this morning's session, and we start off with our first presenter this morning, Mr. David NKUSI. Mr. NKUSI is a heritage sites protection specialist at the Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy under the Ministry of Youth and Culture. He holds a master's degree in heritage management from the University of Kent and Athens, University of Economics and Business. He has over 10 years of working experience working with heritage sites, mainly focused on identifying and carrying out research proposing efficient and proper conservation and management plans, supervision, road mapping, and promoting heritage sites at both national and international levels. Mr. NKUSI will be sharing with us Rwandan solutions to Rwandan problems, heritage decolonization, and community organization in the Nyanza district of Rwanda.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hope this presentation finds you all well. Yes, I'm David NKUSI from Rwanda, and I'm the Heritage Sites Protection Specialist. Yes, first and foremost, allow me present to you an overview of our research project that was carried out in collaboration with Dr. Annalisa Bolin here in Rwanda. And basically, number one, the research highlights and examines community relations to heritage resources in the rural district of Nyanza. And it investigates the possibilities for more engaged models of heritage management, which can deliver better on agendas of decolonization and development. Yes, our research finds that Nyanza heritage stakeholders highly value heritage social and economic roles, but communities are also significantly alienated from these heritage resources. And in seeking to bridge this gap, we the heritage professionals, have utilized the discourse of technocratic improvement, but community leaders emphasize ideas of ownership, drawing from the higher state level discourse of self-reliance and homegrown solutions. They mobilize actually state-owned attempts to filter developing and decolonizing initiatives through Rwandan frameworks to advocate for communities' right to participate in heritage management. This local agency offers a roadmap for utilizing favorable aspects of existing governance to push heritage management towards community engagement and decolonization. Next slide, please. Hello? Yes. This is basically the map of Rwanda, showcasing the 6 provinces that we have got in the country, and where the arrow points is where Nyanza is. Nyanza district is one of the 8 districts in the southern province of Rwanda. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the King's Palace Museum. One of the, actually, this is the center of gravity, the main pull factor for tourism in Nyanza. It's the main reason why visitors come to Nyanza. So it's one of the unique heritage resources that we've got in the country, because it's the King's Palace Museum, and as you can see, that modern building was built in 1932, and it hosted the last king of Rwanda, King Mutara Rudahigwa. Yes, we can go to the next stage. So why Nyanza? Why Rwanda at this time? One, like many African countries, Rwanda has got rich history exhibited in museums through language, music, dance, and the heritage sites located in different parts of the country. And despite the 1994 genocide against Tutsi that left Rwanda in shambles, the government's will and orientation towards conservation of culture, history, and heritage has been at the center of focus, with significant and practical efforts on ground. And this has come out as through resilience and hard work. The country came up with development strategies and the policies that were far-fetched from the past traditions to find a way that works well vis-a-vis faced challenges. And of course, the journey into heritage sites management is progressive and certain, thanks to Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy, in close collaboration with key stakeholders like Rwanda Development Board, GIZ, and district authorities. The heritage sector is still expanding and growing. To the tune now we have 80 museums in the country and over 500 heritage sites under the management of Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy and the Ministry of Youth and Culture. There is, of course, vivid focus on made and realized in drafting cultural heritage policies and the laws to protect and promote these heritage resources of national importance. Like any other districts in Rwanda, Nyanza has potential heritage sites, and if well preserved, promoted, and sustained, can bring in socio-economic benefits to local communities living around these heritage resources. And Nyanza being a cultural hub, the district boasts of well-established museums, as I said, community-based tourism enterprises that pose a great deal to empower local communities around. The district now is actually a cultural tourism destination and well-positioned in the Southern Heritage Corridor of Rwanda. And it serves as a capital city for other 7 districts, as I said earlier, in the province. Nyanza district is blessed with 2 public museums and 1 private museum, the Rwanda Art Museum. We have the King's Palace Museums, as you have seen the upper slides. We have also the Homegrown Solution Museum. So alongside these well-established museums, the destination has documented 5 sites of outstanding value that form part of our national heritage. besides, recently we introduced or set up Nyanza cultural trails where visitors can experience authentic walks through traditional pathways. And these 3 hiking trails, 2 of them, the Royal Trail and the Big View Trail, are certified as premium hiking trails. And the other 3rd one is also underway. I must say that these trails actually offer hikers an incredible experience that blends hiking with discovering Rwandan history and culture. Yes, we can go to another slide. Yes, we are witnessing systems and practices of heritage management experienced in many parts of Africa, actually, were all of colonial impositions. And this did not end at independence. The trend continued up to date. In many parts of African countries, heritage sites have, since colonial period, faced multiple problems that demand effective conservation and sustainable management approaches if the sites are to continue thriving while benefiting the present and future generations. From observation, some scholars like Webb and Doro have argued that actually colonization ushered into sub-Saharan Africa Western style of heritage conservation. So that's something that is still affecting African continent. And when we go to the global stage through UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICROM, means that heritage can only be seen as a technical, standardized, and non-flexible system with very little room for local communities. And this discourse at international level, of course, brings in the monumentality and physical remains at the expense of functionality, meaning, and community connection. So it's a challenge that we found actually within the communities that stay around these heritage sites. Yes, next slide. Yeah, this the photos. This one is where the former. It's also the former royal palace in Nyanza, and this is also a Catholic church that was built by Belizeans in the 50s. So it's these are some of the attractions that one may visit when you are in Nyanza or hiking these trails in Nyanza. Next slide. Yes, this is also one of the sites. Ichuzi Nyamagana. It's its history is related to the king, the last king of Rwanda, the one who used to stay in the King's Palace Museum, as I mentioned. So it's also one of the outstanding sites that we have got in the country. Yes, we can go to the next stage. Yes, here we are talking about some of the findings. The communities around actually felt that they are not consulted, they are not engaged, they are not in the planning process. They are disengaged, and one of them echoed and said, "We don't want to see results. We want to be part of the results." So it's something. It's a strong message that was carried out from there, and because they see heritage resources as government projects, and that they are not concerned at all. So, and this that's why they give less care to these resources. So, and one of them also said on the issue of ownership, said we cannot own what we don't understand. So there is an issue there that was raised, and they said ownership starts in mind until we are satisfied these heritage resources will be neglected always. And all in all, we need to be trusted. So the issue of building trust between the central government and the local communities is something that we have to think about if we are to decolonize the management practices of the top-down approach and instead of the bottom or grassroots approach. The next slide, please. Yeah, this is the Royal Trail marked with letter R. So it's really interesting when you're hiking around this place. You go seeing different things, farming activities, different activities altogether. So it's very interesting. And the hiking trails actually connect you to different heritage sites. So it's one of the way to promote these heritage sites in Nyanza and the country. Next slide. Yes, this is what I was saying before, or what some of the findings that the local communities told us, and the issue of ownership, engagement, building trust, self-pride, self-worth is something that they feel were scrapped off, and they need to have that sense of trust. They need to bring back that sense of responsibility in the management of their resources. Next slide. Yes, this is, as I said, Rwanda, we have 6 provinces, but this is the 7th province that is the diaspora. So Rwandans outside Rwanda have of the 7th province. So here, as you've seen, it was 2016 in San Francisco, and they had Rwanda Day, Rwanda Cultural Day, and the theme was Agaciro, that is self-worth, a heritage of dignity. So this is one way of creating that mindset of ownership. Whether you are in the country or outside the country, you have to feel of value. You have to be of value, and that's one way of promote our heritage, or to bring in these youth to come and own and visit these rich resources that you have got in the country. Yes, another slide. Yes, this is Inyambo cattle. These are unique species that are kept at the King's Palace Museums. They used to be there during the time of the Rwandan monarch, but we restored these cattle to. These are unique attractions at the King's Palace Museum. Next slide. This is the Big View Trail. As I said, we have 3. One is the Royal Trail. This is the Big View Trail. Destroyed by communities, and that's what piqued our interest to go and do some research and know why such amount of destruction was made. And communities were like, we were not consulted, we were not, we don't know what is, you want to take our land away. So there are so many things, but now through community dialogues, we have tried to restore some kind of peace, and I think no more destruction that is being done. Next. Yes, I think this is the end of our my presentation, and you can see maybe we shall share the link, and these are some of the publications, and I think we have more 3 publications coming up. And as I said, we are trying our best to see that we empower communities around these sites and restore a sense of pride and in managing these resources together. Thank you so much, Mwakoze, and thank you for listening. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. NKUSI. What an enlightening presentation. We hope that our audience can engage in questions on how we can apply this research here in Belize. So please drop your questions and thoughts in the comment section. Next in our session on global heritage lessons to learn from, we will have a presentation from Mr. Cheong, a PhD candidate at American University in Washington, D.C. Mr. Cheong has been participating in several Belizean long-term projects since 2006. Some of note are the Pakbitun Regional Archaeological Project, Social Archaeology Research Program, and the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance. Sorry. Being a part of these projects allowed him the opportunities to survey and excavate both cave and surface archaeological sites like Pakbitun, Minanha, Caves Branch, Batikilik, and Ixchel. He also conducts research at Bagan in Myanmar, the southeastern US, Mexico, and at Swahili sites in Kenya. His interests include heritage management, ceramics, archaeomusicology, ancient food and beverage, craft production, and architecture. Today, Mr. Cheong will be speaking to us about community heritage management for Belize, lessons from Australia and New Zealand.
Good morning. I would like to thank Heritage Education Network Belize and all its directors for accepting my presentation for this year's Culture Symposium. Thank you for providing this important and accessible platform for the Belizean community and beyond. Belize, Australia, and New Zealand share similar colonial pasts and similar treatment of their non-European population. There were a series of historical events that happened in Australia and New Zealand that I will not elaborate here that set them on a path of tolerance, acceptance, and ownership. Community Heritage Management, or CHM, is basically the management of local heritage with equal participation between the local communities and the outside parties like archaeologists, anthropologists, researchers, local organizations, institutions, the state, and/or international organizations. It should not be confused with cultural heritage management because the term cultural could encompass natural identity, whereas community denotes the local community. State and organizations that practice cultural instead of community heritage management tends to alienate the local community. This is important because heritage and the local community are interconnected. The building blocks of heritage are basically the local community's customs, values, so without the local community, heritage becomes abstract. Most states and international organizations continues to use the term preservation instead of conservation and cultural instead of community. The term preservation and conservation are used interchangeably, but they have separate meanings that are irreconcilable. One involves the local community while the other omits the local community or the people aspect in policymaking and enforcement of heritage sites. Preservation means to protect and safeguard the heritage regardless of the needs of the local community, while conservation means to include the human elements into the heritage management policy by including the full participation of the local community. The first component is community. Community is a multifaceted and politically charged concept with meanings and consequences that can be altered with a simple change in its situation. Depending on the situation, different priorities will become important and directly influence the purpose of community heritage engagement. Community and heritage work hand in hand in that heritage is the building blocks that define a community by its custom, language, landscape, history, artifacts, and monuments. Heritage is flexible as it can be constructed and reconstructed according to time and place. As such, community are also constantly changing with different needs and concerns. A second component is local. Local denotes people who live and utilize the resources at or close to and around heritage sites. Local is important because local heritage value immediately influence and impact the local community, whereas heritage interests of other levels or scale are less important. However, local interests in heritage are often viewed as being less significant than those of national or world heritage levels, as if it is measured by the number of people involved. This is a problem because a global stakeholder has no personal knowledge of the World Heritage Site itself, but the traditional owners that live and spend most of his or her life in and around the World Heritage Site does. So, for non-local global stakeholder to make preservation policy is a fundamentally flawed practice, even if they are state or national level stakeholders. In Australian CHM, the local is more important than what might interest global stakeholder. Another essential component is diversity. When dealing with CHM, one has to understand that each and every project should be approached as a case-by-case basis based on the context and the local community. Australian Aborigines are not a single cultural group, but instead it is actually made of indigenous community that are diverse in language, specific customs, and the nature of kin relations, economic practices, and so forth. As such, community-based engagement should be diverse and varies according to social, cultural, political demands of the individual community. Current CHM projects in Australia are a response to this diversity of cultural, historical, and life experience of indigenous people. Models adopted for CHM has to be flexible and locally specific. Each heritage engagement has to be developed and adopted at the local community level. What works for one community may not work for another. Recognizing this diversity component is thus essential. Perhaps the most important component in practicing CHM is decolonization. This partnership between indigenous people and the various state and private organizations should be conceived as long-term, local community-driven, collaborative projects that gave power back to the traditional owner. To achieve the goal of decolonizing archaeology, this collaboration should accept and include the indigenous people as full partners in the pursuit of understanding the past while making it relevant to the present, because it is the right thing to do. It is important then that all collaboration projects between indigenous community and archaeologists should employ mutually acceptable research agenda, work practices, and interpretive framework so to directly and indirectly benefit the local community. Traditional owners should be central to the managing of their heritage, with archaeology as a prominent component in achieving community-identified priorities in land and heritage management. Archaeological projects should be secondary to the empowering and production of outcomes that are greater than the archaeological inquiries that ultimately benefit the local community and their heritage. Decolonization seeks to allow the return of ownership and control of community heritage back to the traditional owner by having meaningful engagement and giving them power to make decisions and action that will benefit their heritage. Part of returning power to the indigenous people is recognizing them as traditional owners instead of as stakeholders. CHM-based research aims to empower community by contributing to the construction of local identity. The term stakeholder is commonly used in the heritage management industry, as it presents the notion that all parties have a voice in the management process. But by labeling them as stakeholders, it completely avoided the issue of ownership and reduced them to just mere participants in the management of their own heritage and lands. Similarly, the term stakeholder go beyond community place and geographical boundaries. For example, international businesses can be stakeholders. Acknowledging indigenous people as traditional owner instead gave the power and ownership back to them, creating a host-guest relationship, outsider being the guest. Instead of a parent-child relationship, the parent or protector being the government or outside expert. Such restructuring allowed the traditional owner to become the leading partners and controllers of their own heritage, which is fitting as traditional owners don't see themselves as owning the land, but instead they are connected to it and thus have the responsibility to look after it. A final component to CHM is that everything is heritage. Heritage is commonly perceived as tangible, material evidence, sites, but this is misleading because it can also be intangible, as in customs and practices. Practice is the link between people and material culture. Our daily routines is a form of ritual or simply practice. Constructed from belief, stories, and how we see the world around us, practice is performed in particular setting and landscape that may subject to changes over time. Basically, phenomenological and experiential understanding are heritage and must be consulted as evidence in interpretations. Additionally, a heritage landscape does not only consist of the physical environments, nature and man-made, but also the traditions, cultural perceptions, stories, practices, and the relationship between the community and the land. Archaeologists need to be willing to risk stepping outside of the intellectual boundaries and engage critically with non-archaeological knowledge and values. Traditional owners has to be consulted in order to facilitate an exchange of ideas and an exchange of the archaeologists' separate and shared knowledge system. Reversing the usual consultation pattern where now the expert reacts to the community-driven agenda rather than the community reacting to an archaeological agenda. Put archaeology in the service of the local indigenous heritage with anthropology in order to better understand and appreciate indigenous practices. Archaeological sites are spaces that provide access to webs of meaning and connection for indigenous people. They are part of the production and reproduction of indigenous knowledge. CHM should be a holistic approach to archaeological practice incorporating both material and non-material culture realms. In conclusion, the key reason as to why community-based heritage research and partnership in Australia and New Zealand are progressive is because they approach heritage management practice with the understanding that it is not about preservation as though no one lives at these heritage sites anymore, but more of a conservation approach where they embrace the fact that these heritage sites are alive with contemporary inhabitants. They learn from their not too so distant past and work towards giving back the control and ownership of heritage to the traditional owners instead of assuming the role of protectors. As such, the heritage owner resumed the position of custodial to the traditional land. These custodials of the land are intimate with the environment they live in, and as such are instrumental in the understanding of how past society lived. It is a kinder, more considerate type of archaeological practice that reflect the type of CHM-based research projects that Australia and New Zealand is leading the world in. These are not new concepts, but they were able to adopt and perfected it by decolonizing archaeology and embracing equal collaboration on top of respect of the local community and the land. Perhaps one day Belize will do so as well. Thank
Thank you, Mr. Cheong, for those valuable lessons on decolonization and community heritage management. Next on our lineup this morning is Dr. Annabel Ford, a Maya archaeologist who decoded the ancient Maya landscape by combining archaeological survey with traditional ancient knowledge. Admiring the local knowledge of the Maya forest, where when she encountered El Pilar, a major Maya city linking Belize and Guatemala, she envisioned a place of monument discovery in the context of the traditional knowledge of the people living in the region today. She recognized the Maya forest garden as a relic of traditional land use, accounting for ancient Maya settlement patterns. She brings her extensive field experience and broad inquisitive mind to demystify the Maya. I give you Dr. Annabel Ford.
Greetings. We're here to honor monuments and not discuss ruins. Monuments versus ruins is a case of honor and respect. This is Annabel Ford, and I'm here with...
And Cynthia Ellis Topsey.
And we are going to talk about how to honor the legacies that we live with today.
Yes, and we are acknowledging, appreciating, and celebrating the wealth untold that is possible for overcoming many of the challenges that we face globally.
Yes, when we call monuments, when we call ruins that should be monuments, when we call milpas slash and burn, those terms hold power and can either be disregard and disrespectful or be something that honors, and we advocate honor and respect.
We know that through nature we learn how to nurture and therefore give ourselves the opportunity to address many of the problems that are being put in front of us, such as issues related to climate change and food sovereignty.
Yeah, and the milpa cycle is a regenerative process of land use that uses trees, bushes, and smaller plants and food to reduce temperature, maintain biodiversity, conserve water, build fertility, and reduce erosion, things that we need every day. And that cycle, you can see it goes from short-term annuals that we eat to long-term perennials that we can use for food.
So we can learn from the gifts that we have been given, the treasures from the ancient Maya, that we have everything that we need to function effectively and sustainably in our world today.
Yes, these heroes are doing their practices and regenerative cycle, sustainable cycle, all the while provisioning their family and caring for our earth.
So as we are changing the narrative and being responsible in bringing forth a succession strategy for the new generation, this can become a part of our curriculum and different ways of knowing, different ways of being, different ways of stepping into providing food in a manner that is healthy and that is sustainable.
So we're going to move to a video now and get back to you in a moment.
Of the world's ancient civilizations, the Maya stand out as one of the most impressive and mysterious. By the year 1000 AD, most of the Maya city centers in the Yucatan were being neglected. Left behind were huge pyramids, intricate works of art, and a complex written language. Oddly, these great achievements were soon forgotten by the Maya themselves. But why were the cities abandoned in the first place? Maya farmer Alfonso Sul explains that even the Maya today don't know the answer.
Well, one of the things that I realized is that when we were going to school, they used to tell us that the Mayas used to live in this country and then they disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. So we were not able to connect ourselves with the present civilizations that are visible with the various ancient monuments that are left in Belize. So one day I met a fellow from the US, I think, and he was looking at the ancient monuments in my farm. And he said, wow, what a wonderful work. He said, I wonder where those Mayas went to. I said, they didn't go anywhere. What do you mean? No, they didn't go anywhere. Where they are? So I told him, you are talking to one of them. We were not taught about the history of our people. It was in my adult age that I managed to read all these things about the Mayas, and I'm able to connect them with myself.
Many have claimed that the ancient Maya degraded their land, resulting in an environmental collapse. This is not likely, says archaeologist Annabel Ford, who in 1983 found the ancient city of El Pilar in western Belize. In the vicinity of the crumbled city, Dr. Ford and her team discovered that 90% of the trees were species that were useful to the Maya in some way. 20 species were particularly dominant.
We were able to come up with these 20 dominant plants that were all useful, all important for construction, for medicine, for thatching, for production, for fruit, for gum, even for the birds, even for the animals, are counted among important uses that the Maya have. As we started considering the nature and identifying the trees, we realized that this was a forest garden, and in fact the Maya were gardening the forest. Now we're looking at the relic. It's a legacy of probably 8 millennia of selection and certainly 4 millennia of fairly intense use.
And so the Maya and their ancestors were being selective in their use of plants during thousands of years of trial and error. Another breakthrough came when Dr. Ford saw how contemporary Maya farmers near El Pilar were growing their crops. It was not in the Western style of large fields of single items like corn or beans, but rather in small mixed crop plots called milpas. Furthermore, the Maya were using a sophisticated and sustainable cycle of planting that left most of their land in forest. Here's how the cycle works. In preparation for planting, the milpa farmer cuts and burns a piece of his forest. Fire is a necessary part of the cycle that returns microelements to the soil in the form of charcoal. Next, the farmer plants corn seeds among the tree stumps. And among the corn plants, he sows beans, squash, and as many as 90 other kinds of annual crop plants. He does this for about 4 years, and no plow touches his soil. Master farmer Narciso Torres uses only a sharp pole, and because Narciso's soil is not plowed, it never washes away when it rains. Furthermore, the milpa farmer uses no chemical fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. Nearby, streams run clear and unpolluted. To the untrained eye, the milpa doesn't look clean and organized in the way of Western monoculture.
But in fact, it's retaining water, building fertility, biodiversity of the soil. It has the worms and the charcoal. All of those things are right in there, and they're kept there. They're not moving around. Alfonso Sul says very, very poignantly to me when I was talking one time, I've never seen a milpa where there's erosion, and I've never seen a plowed field that doesn't.
Victor Chambor, a Lacandon Maya farmer from the Mexican state of Chiapas, also has vast knowledge refined through the countless generations of his ancestors. He is particularly proud of a large stretch of rainforest near his milpa. He knows every plant in the forest and what things he can use there. 4 years into the milpa cycle, seeds drifting in from the surrounding forest have sprouted into young trees in Narciso's milpa. He keeps the ones that are useful to him and eliminates the others. Narciso continues to sow his annual crop plants for another 4 years. By then, the young forest trees are beginning to cast too much shade for corn or beans, so he initiates the cycle elsewhere by burning another plot of forest. The new forest, with its many products, will be as important to Narciso as his milpa. It will grow and mature for the final 12 years of the cycle and will become a place for abundant wildlife.
There's this image of slash and burn being really destructive, and the image that comes from our European position that to get more product you have to clear more land, and that means all land is cleared. The milpa system is a cycle. At any one time, they'll have a minimum of 2/3 of the land in forest.
And that is a critical point. Dr. Ford has concluded that if the Maya used the highly sustainable milpa cycle in ancient times, it's not likely that they deforested the land and degraded their environment. Instead, we need to look at other social, economic, and political causes for the collapse of great cities. The Maya farmers lived on, and with neither pyramids to build or kings to support, they continued to perfect this high-yield milpa cycle through hundreds of generations of hard work and accumulated knowledge. The milpa cycle may be their most important achievement and their greatest gift to the future of mankind. But in this modern era where agriculture is increasingly mechanized, will this tremendous knowledge be lost?
There are fewer and fewer of these master forest gardeners, like Victor, like Narciso, like Alfonso. These people carry a knowledge that is a 8,000-year experimental practice. Can you imagine? And to not include them in a sustainable future when they can really step up and help, and they're ready to help. We need them. And if these people are not here for us, we can never find out that the kinds of things they know that have been this long experiment. The sustainability of the Maya Forest Garden is unparalleled. We're back in that marvelous video that really says you're talking to one. And as we're talking to one, we wonder, how are we honoring our ancient Maya?
The example that the Maya set for us is that we honor nature, we begin to have a deeper way of honoring each other, learning from each other across the globe. And these resources are available to us readily through the Maya Forest Garden.
As we consider ancient monuments as testimony to the Maya success, and with the milpa as a regenerative cycle of select and grow that is really addressing the impacts of climate change, we can see we can explore solutions past by recognizing the significance and engaging all of humanity, right, Cynthia?
Yes, certainly. The monuments give us a reminder of the results of our exploration for the present and for the future. And it's a very exciting time to live in, where we can embrace the opportunities and seek peace as the plants, the animals, and nature show us how to nurture.
Yeah, this is the knowledge and practice that can only be followed in the footsteps of a practitioner of the Maya Forest Garden. And it is found locally and holds promise and is clearly the wealth untold, providing, proving, in fact, that under the shade we flourish.
That is why we are telling it, and we are very proud and appreciative of these treasures in the Americas. And our language has to be about monuments and not ruins, because we are not ruined, we are flourishing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ford and Ms. Topsey, for that presentation on monuments and the valuable point that you make about the use of our language in how we speak of our heritage sites. So far, we have had a series of presentations and amazing work from which we can all learn so much. So we will now be moving on to learn live from our presenters in our question and answer session. So I invite our presenters to join us in the live stream. Welcome, Dr. Ford and Dr. Cheong. And as we wait for others to join us, let's start with our question and answer section. We have so many questions. And I will start with, Joanna Garcia asking, are there other options to slash and burning? Every year we have huge fires due to cleaning of land, especially down south Toledo. I believe this is for Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll give you some time to work that out, and perhaps we'll move on to questions for Dr. Cheong. All right. Mr. Cheong, I love your suggestion of using the term traditional owner instead of stakeholder, but do you think this is an appropriate term to use when the local community engaging with or caring for the heritage site may not be directly descended from the culture that originally occupied and constructed it? That is the first part of the question. I am thinking of the diverse communities created here in Belize through colonial and neo-colonial processes that are made of immigrants, refugees, etc. Also, there are examples of, I think we lost the rest of the question there, but here we have a question relating to engaging and caring for the heritage sites, but not being directly descended from the culture that originally occupied and constructed it. Can you shed some light, Mr. Cheong?
Yeah, you can hear me, right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So you don't have to be a descendant community or even a multi-generation family that live on the same land, you know. So if you say move to a new apartment building or a new subdivision or a new community, new village, after living there for a week, is that your village? Or is it somebody else's village? Are you going to throw trash everywhere? Right? So you're going to take care of the place that you are associated with. You don't have to be multi-generation, or you don't have to be Maya or Garifuna or Mestizo community that has grown up in that village where your ancestor also lived there, right? So people who come to Belize and become Belizean, they have now a Belizean identity. So they now have ownership of the country of Belize. This is theirs, right? So people who drive around in their car or riding in the bus and they throw trash out. You know why they throw trash out? Because they think the road doesn't belong to them, or the land next to the road doesn't belong to them. So the trash is somebody else's business. So start taking ownership. That road, that land next to the road, everything is yours. You take care of it, right? The river, the trees, the forest, the monuments, the sites. You know, it doesn't have to be built by your family or your ancestor. So I think anyone can be traditional owner. Okay. Now traditional owner really is taking ownership. That's the first part, right? You can't just say, I don't like the foreigner taking our things, but did you participate? Did you even care for it? Right? So there are things like that start to changing mindset, and then slowly through education and teaching, like especially school children, they will grow up taking ownership. It's hard to teach the older generation to not throw trash or not destroy cultural monuments or not throw stuff into the river, but start young. Our younger generation now learns and adapt fast, and then they take ownership. I think it's education and just taking participate is what it needs. I hope
Thank
that
you. Thank
helps.
you for that insight and those thoughts on what ownership means. It's certainly something that we ought to consider as a multicultural nation. We have another question. How do you believe we can create the traditional ownership concept in Belize?
Sorry. Again, I wrote down the question and I wrote down some answer. I think education is important. It's a good start. And then how to create concept rules. So now after knowing that, say you don't have to live in the site or you don't have to be close to the site, but if you are in the general area, so let's say NICH, everybody around that area, all the way to say San Ignacio, Santa Elena, Benque, Melchor even, they are traditional owner. They don't have to just be the people that live directly on the site or next to the site. They could be miles and miles away, because as long as they can say a sense of the location, say they could still see El Castillo, you're basically in the neighborhood, So I think like David NKUSI in Rwanda, he did survey a questionnaire of the local community all around the site, and they say they don't find a reason to. They feel like they are what if I remember correctly, not part of the project or the site because the government omitted them. But did they participate? Is the problem, right? Say the hiking trail, for example, he mentioned that they were destroying trees and land and whatnot, but did they participate? Did they? Is the outreach good enough that now villagers understand that they shouldn't just cut down the forest? Because when tourists come to the trails, they could see how it is, and they could see villager living in peace with the forest instead of just clear cut, right? Also, participation, for example. I remember like a couple of years ago, they were doing seismic testing in the reef in Belize. And there were people that, write petition, complain, and, voice their concern. So you don't have to protest or yell, but you can still participate. And as traditional owner, if you participate and take ownership, stakeholders, meaning outsiders, they can then see that, okay, the owners don't want this, so let's not do it, right? So I think that's it's all education, participation, and I think it will help.
Thank you, Mr. Chong, for those insights. Um, you mentioned the work on Dr. Nkuzi, and so let's. Oh, he has left. I guess he's having some trouble. Dr. Ford, can we hear you now? No, no, we still can't. We do have other questions for Dr. Ford and Miss Topsey, and so perhaps Miss Topsey can answer some of these questions pertaining to your research.
Can you
So the
hear me?
first, yes, excellent. We can hear you. So the first question that we were looking at is, are there other options to slash and burning? So every year we have huge fires due to clearing of land, especially in down south Toledo.
So what is the question?
alternative options to slash and burn?
Well, that's a very interesting question in the sense that we are here honoring the indigenous way of being. And therefore, in doing this honoring, perhaps we can study and learn more how to do it properly based on indigenous knowledge. I would like Dr. Ford to comment on that because we were actually in communication with Rafael Manzanero from the Chiquibull Forest when we were having a whole set of fires raging throughout this region and focus on addressing how to deal with this issue. So we're actually having a series of meetings and workshops not to look at milpa farming as an alternative, but how to honor and to do it properly, because ancient wisdom knew how to deal with this situation.
Thank you, Ms. Topsey, for that response. Um, and now pertaining to the Mayan forest, how do you think we can get the next generation interested in continuing to preserve their heritage? And this question comes from Roeli Miranda. The question is, how do we get the next generation to jump on the path of the Mayan foresters and get them interested in continuing to preserve their heritage? Miss Topsy? Oh, I think we seem to be having so many technical issues this morning. Dr. NKUSI, are you with us? Can we get an indication? Yes, excellent. We will
Yes,
move on
yes.
with a question to Dr. NKUSI. And our question reads, this is from Ms. Rayburn. What would you say has been the most concerning problem you have had to come up with solutions for in Rwanda?
Oh.
Dr. Ikuzi,
And me?
can you hear us?
Yes, yes, you can hear. I can hear you.
Okay. The
Can you hear me
question,
as well?
yes, yes. The question is, what has been the most concerning problem you have had to come up with solutions for?
Yes, yes. As I said in my presentation, that Rwanda witnessed the worst tragic moment in the world, the 1994 genocide against Tutsi, and after 1994, to live with the consequences of genocide. One of the solutions was to see how we can bring in, restore hope after the genocide. And one of the things is the home gachacha courts or the local courts. As you well know, it's now many people around the world are still imagining how Rwanda was united after the 1994 genocide and how they managed to settle down genocide cases locally. So the local courts played a bigger role in restoring peace and conflict resolution in the country. And this, when we talk of homegrown solution, is we get back, we step back into the past and get uh, these past traditions. How did they, pre-colonial Rwanda, how did they settle down colonially? Of how we come up with homegrown solutions. We have also the issue of Rwanda is in the world. Saturday of the month, every last Saturday of the month, we do general cleaning in the whole country. So people get to have that self pride and work towards the better Rwanda. So these are some few. Actually, we have, as I said, we have a museum specifically exhibiting those homegrown solutions. So far, we have attempted to make use of, and they are working. We are saying we can't. We have a saying in Kinyarwanda that you can't wait. You to get an aid or any help from outside. It's hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yes, yes. So it says that you always get help after the rain. So what about when it is raining? So you have to find solution always for the uh, local solution to local problems. You don't need to wait for someone else from outside to come and give you some solution. So those are the tradition, the past traditions are helping us a lot in coming up with solutions to the challenges we meet. Uh, those are some of few. So I could go. The list is big. So I could. But the most thing is that how did we unite Rwandans after the 1994 genocide? So the role of local courts played a bigger role in bringing hope in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nkuzi. Now, considering our technical difficulties and that we are at time, we will have to be wrapping up our question and answer session. However, to our presenters where we have not been able to address the questions, feel free to jump into the comment section, Dr. Ford, Ms. Topsey, also Dr. Nkuzi and Mr. Cheong. There are so many valuable questions in the comment section. Feel free to jump in and answer questions in our comment section. So, thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for your presentations. And we will move on to taking our break. And we will be returning after our break at 10:30 a.m., where we will be looking at Lamanai, an Indian church, and recent research conducted there. So we will be breaking now for our
I just want
coffee break.
to pop in, Mr. Sato. Sorry. Hi, good morning, everyone. Because we are doing really well with time, we will reconvene at around 10:15, 10:20. We are very much early in our coffee break schedule. So around 10:15, 10:30, we'll be back for that.
Thank you, Co-Director Martinez. We will see you here in approximate 15 minutes. Enjoy your coffee break. And thank you to our presenters and our
Keeping up with language, culture, heritage, and the arts from October 5th to the 7th. Make sure you're there.
All we know that you are there. Were you on there October 5th to the 7th? Heritage Education Network Belize Culture Symposium, Community Issues and Innovative Practices.
Hi there,
Make sure you join with our Facebook and YouTube. I want to there. You better be there.
Keeping up with language, culture, heritage, and the arts from October 5th to the 7th. Make sure you're there.
All we know that you are there.
Were you on there October 5th to the 7th? Heritage Education Network Belize Culture Symposium, Community Issues and Innovative Practices. Make sure you join with our Facebook and YouTube. I want to there. You better be there.
language, culture, heritage, and the arts from October 5th to the 7th. Make sure you're there.
Ala we know that you are there.
Were you on there October 5th to the 7th? Heritage Education Network Belize Culture Symposium, Community Issues and Innovative Practices. Make sure you join with our Facebook and YouTube. I want to there. You better be there.
Welcome back to our second session of the Belize Culture Symposium Day 3. Moving into our second session for this morning, we are bringing the focus back home to Belize. From the name of our theme this session, we are primarily discussing research done at Lamanai and the community of Indian Church Village. Lamanai is a diverse heritage landscape best known for the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve. But this is, which is also managed by the Institute of Archaeology, NICH. Greater Lamanai landscapes such as the Kakabish site and includes the diverse flora and fauna that are fed by the New River Lagoon. In this first session, we will hear overviews of the research that began in the 1970s. Lamanai is also the longest occupied site in Belize, and this is of an importance because this site is known for indigenous resistance. And this importance should be given due to the upcoming holiday on October 10th, noted as Indigenous Resistance Day. And it is also important for us to highlight this because even though we are highlighting Indigenous Resistance Day, for the longest time, it was known as Columbus Day or Pan American Day or Dia de las Razas. And so here at HENB, we are trying to shed some light to the importance of that day and why that name needed to be acknowledged. It is also important why HENB pushes this culture symposium and other various forms of heritage education on our platform, not just for local education, but for global education. Lamanai continues to be important today for tourism and educational purpose. It is the bridge between our ancient heritage, our colonial heritage, and our present heritage. We begin our second session with the archaeology of Lamanai, setting the stage for the pivotal role it has placed in the development of the country we now know as Belize. Our first presentation is provided by Dr. James Amers. Dr. Amers has done research in archaeology in Belize since 1988 at sites in the Belize Valley, the Keys, and northern Belize. Dr. Elizabeth Graham began work in Belize since 1973 and was the director of the Institute of Archaeology, formerly known as the Department of Archaeology, from 1978 to 1980. She now teaches at the Institute of Archaeology at the University of College London. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Amers and Dr. Graham.
Is Jim Amers. I wrote this paper with Elizabeth Graham, and I'll be delivering it today. I apologize for my scratchy voice. I'm just getting over a cold, but it is a cold. It's not COVID. So we're going to talk about Lamanai today, but the image on the lower section of the screen of an overgrown Tikal in Guatemala really represents, I think, how archaeologists and many people think of the terminal classic Maya world from about 800 AD to AD 1050. Sites like Tikal and many others were abandoned, leading archaeologists to call the terminal classic typically a time of collapse. Although we see great variation in the timing and nature of the changes, and many archaeologists actually now reject the term collapse for the terminal classic, because of that variation. There is no doubt that Maya civilization was transformed, and changes are particularly clear among artifacts associated with elite people in site cores. Lamanai also changed, but the site is unusual because it was continually occupied right into the historic period. And in this presentation, we discuss some of the factors that might have led to this community's relative stability through a period of radical change in the Maya world. We're going to highlight Lamanai's strategic location on the New River and other factors that are a little bit more difficult to identify in archaeology. So the earliest evidence of occupation at Lamanai is maize pollen from the lagoon that dates to about 1600 BC. As you can see on this list of time periods, the pre-classic period at Lamanai is dated 1500 BC to 8250. And in that early era, Lamanai is really very similar to other sites in the Maya lowlands. Pre-classic architecture at Lamanai follows the general conventions found at other sites, for example, sort of masks on stair-side outsets of temple platforms. And the pottery of the pre-classic period at Lamanai is also stylistically and technologically very similar to pottery from sites really right across the Maya lowlands. This is some Sierra group ceramics from the pre-classic period looked very similar anywhere in the Maya lowlands, suggesting that even by the pre-classic there was really intense interaction across the Maya lowlands. In the classic period, which is dated 250 to 750 AD, Lamanai remains keyed into the rest of the region, and it's in the early part of the early classic that we see pottery styles that are very similar to pottery styles in the sort of heartland of the Petén of Guatemala or the Belize Valley. Around 450 or 500, however, Lamanai pottery styles seem to diverge a little bit from styles to the south and west. A good example of this is this little polychrome dish with a cute little hummingbird in the center that was found in one of the two tombs in structure N956, which you may know as the Mask Temple at Lamanai. This actually predates the masks on the temple and probably dates to about 500 AD. The terminal classic at Lamanai is dated from 750 AD to about 900 or 960. And this was a time of great change. And as I said, at many sites, this period represents, as the name terminal classic implies, the end of the classic period and the end of occupation. But it's really important to emphasize that not every site was abandoned in the terminal classic. And at sites at Lamanai and sites that were not abandoned, the terminal classic really just marks the end of the classic period culture. For example, at sites like Katipu in the Belize Valley or sites in the Petén Lakes region of Guatemala, and some sites on the Belizean Keys were occupied right into the colonial era. And another important point is the decline and abandonment of sites across the Maya lowlands varied in time from as early as about AD 750 in the Patesh Petun region of Guatemala to as late as 1050 or later at Chichen Itza and in Mexico. The term abandonment, like the term collapse, is used somewhat variably and maybe too loosely in archaeology. The abandonment, for example, of Chichen Itza is typically placed at about 1050 AD, but the site was never lost, and it remained an important pilgrimage site into the post-classic and historic periods. And similarly, the fertile lands around deteriorating or even abandoned classic period site cores across the Maya lowlands almost certainly continued to be used by local farmers after the classic. Recently, some scholars have asserted that the terminal classic changes at Lamanai were so dramatic that the site was really not all that different from sites like Tikal or Karakol that experienced dramatic decline. And we agree that there were major changes at Lamanai, but our evidence shows that these changes impacted the elites much more strongly than the general population outside the site core. Evidence for what David Pendergast called stability through change at Lamanai includes Linda Howey's research on the ways in which pots were made in the terminal classic and early post-classic. Howey found a lot of continuity in ceramic technology, although the surface treatments were responding to new elite tastes. We believe that by the end of the early classic, Lamanai was already allying itself with commercial interests that extended around the Yucatan Peninsula, indicated by those arrows. Lamanai traders and merchants may have distributed salt from the Belizean Keys during the late Classic, and if you want more on salt, you can read, for example, Joe Ball's 1977 article. But by the Terminal Classic, the salt trade declined and gave way to trade in a variety of goods. Both Lamanai and the Keys reflect movements of people from the coast inland. For example, Linda Howey was able to show that one of the pottery technology groups at Lamanai in the Terminal Classic was from Altun Ha. There seems to be a great deal of movement of people around the peninsula in general in the Terminal Classic. One indication of population movement is changes in burial practices at Lamanai. Distinctive face-down burials appear at Marco Gonzalez on Ambergris Key in the Terminal Classic around the 800s, and then into Lamanai in the early post-Classic around 1000, suggesting this kind of movement inland. So there's plenty of change in the Terminal Classic at Lamanai, but these changes seem to represent new people at the top with new ideas and new practices, rather than the sort of disintegration that we see so often at other sites. The post-Classic period at Lamanai begins around AD 900 or 960 and ends with the arrival of the Spanish in the region in 1544. The early post-Classic pottery of Lamanai shows the clearest break from the stylistic canons of the southern lowlands of Belize and Guatemala. Of particular interest are the Zacpa group ceramics, some of which are shown here. A type in this ceramic group called Zalao gouged and sized. The vessel here, if you can see my cursor, this type shows both a new popularity of incised decoration over painted polychrome decoration that was popular in the Classic periods, and the design themselves are related to the various types of fine orange ware pottery that are found first way over on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. For example, flowers and reptilian motifs, and an absence of jaguar imagery. These shared designs suggest some sort of long-distance interaction in the early post-Classic period, made possible, we think, by intensive coastal traffic and trade, but that was still a continuation of earlier trends. So, similarly, a late post-Classic type found at Lamanai, palmule incised, is very common along the coasts of Quintana Roo and Yucatan. So how do we explain the success of Lamanai for so many centuries? The site's strategic location on the New River, which connects the central Maya lowlands to the Caribbean coast, is surely relevant here. The diversity of ceramics and other forms of material culture at Lamanai suggests that the site was a center of commerce and trade, with a resilient commercial class that, if not exactly in control, was highly influential. Lamanai's importance as a port made it desirable to groups moving around the peninsula, as the collapse of dynasties across the Maya lowlands in the Terminal Classic left a vacuum in trade opportunities. Dr. Graham believes that merchants of the era were not bystanders, but were responsible for conflicts against long-standing royal dynasties. For their part, some royals probably allied themselves with these new mercantile powers. Pendergast has attributed Lamanai's perseverance in part to its location along the New River Lagoon, which was a rich freshwater resource that provided a means of subsistence, transportation, communication, and trade with other regions of Mesoamerica. And another obvious benefit of the site's location is the availability of fresh water, which would have been especially important in periods of drought. By drought, in this case, we mean lower annual rainfall that was significant enough to affect agricultural production. In the last 20 years or so, evidence for drought in the Terminal Classic has been accumulating, and drought has become a favorite explanation for the decline and abandonment of sites across the Maya world. Most archaeologists acknowledge, however, that lower annual rainfall was probably just one of a variety of challenges faced by the Maya in the Terminal Classic. Importantly, evidence of lower rainfall has not been found everywhere where sites were abandoned dramatically, and the Petech-Petun region of Guatemala is a great example of that. And so this suggests that lower rainfall or drought was just one of a number of factors that led to change. It's also worth noting that, as we know, humans can change the climate. Deforestation in some areas of the lowlands may have created or exacerbated drought-like conditions. It is possible that the Maya around Lamanai were able to manage their natural resources and environment more effectively than people at other sites, but that's really very hard to demonstrate archaeologically. The new river provided access to both the coast and the interior, and the stylistic diversity of ceramics at Lamanai, especially those found near the lagoon during the excavations for the tourist center and museum there, suggests that trade was important at the site. The architecture of the central Ottawa Group Royal or Regal residential complex shows connections to the Gulf Coast in its architectural styles as early as the 700s, and the post-classic pottery also shows stylistic connections to the Gulf Coast that I've written about. The male of the late post-classic so-called loving couple burial at Lamanai was buried with a pair of copper tweezers in West Mexican style. I've tried to highlight them there on the slide. These had circular blades that probably served as a badge of rank or status, and they were still, as Christine White has noted, they're still displayed this way in Western Mexico at the time of Spanish contact. Similarly, the women in the burial, that burial wore a hairstyle that was common in ancient Western Mexico and is still seen there today. Turning to politics, we know that Lamanai was a large site with at least regional importance, and some form of political leadership had to exist there. However, there are indications that control of the site by a royal dynasty or dynasties may not have been as strong or as central at Lamanai as at other sites, which may have saved it. In the 7th century, dynasts seem to have attempted to gain control, but it didn't last, as shown by the toppling of Stela 9 and the deliberate buildup of midden material around the Stela temple. Religion and religious ritual, of course, explain why Maya site cores are dominated by temple pyramids, and deep middens at Lamanai in the site core indicate that ritual activity was important at the site throughout its occupation. Broken late post-classic Chenmo modeled incense burners at structure N956 called the Mass Temple suggest pilgrimage to the site that likely continued into the historic period even as occupation continued. Religious movements, which also stimulate cultural, economic, and political change, have been major factors in world history forever. So think of the widespread influence of Christianity or Islam. And there's really no reason that Mesoamerica couldn't have experienced similar movements. In 1998, Bill Ringel and others proposed what they called a cult of Quetzalcoatl, a network of shrine centers dedicated primarily to Quetzalcoatl or Maya Kukulkan. That may have emerged as early as the late Classic, but are most evident in the Terminal Classic. In a 2004 article, Ringel clarified this, quote, cult, quote, as a set of imagery, beliefs, and practices associated with an ideology of leadership, which seems to have expanded militarily with messianic vigor. So combination there of military, political, and religious significance. Chichen Itza is the proposed easternmost node of that network, but there are hints that I've discussed in a 2014 publication that Lamanai could have been involved. Although Chichen Itza may have been extremely influential because of its status as a major center for honoring Quetzalcoatl, Ringel and his colleagues don't suggest that it directly controlled other sites, or certainly not any as far away as Lamanai. Lamanai may have been one of the more distant sites that drew on the status and prestige of the cult. And as Ringel says, a model holding that certain major sites acted as centers of legitimation for larger hinterlands through much of Mesoamerican prehistory may be an attractive alternative to explanations based on trade, military conquest, or site emulation for sort of the influence of Chichen Itza. So the Spanish colonial period at Lamanai is dated from about AD 1544 to about AD 1700. British settlement in the area overlaps with Spanish occupation from the 1660s to 1862. And from 1862 to 1964, Belize was a British crown colony, then a self-governing crown colony from 1964 to independence in 1981. So Lamanai is an example of a community whose prosperity derived from commerce. Commerce exploded in the pre-classic and early classic, but the fall of Teotihuacan in central Mexico around AD 550 had reverberations everywhere. trade relationships around central Mexico, and importantly, at least as far as the Gulf Coast, would have been renegotiated. So, traditions that originated outside of the Maya lowlands seem to have been percolating into Lamanai since the end of the early Classic. The turbulence of the terminal Classic in the Maya lowlands seems to have intensified the changes that occurred at Lamanai, but the changes we see are really mostly in elite-related artifacts and architecture. The resilience of Lamanai likely has something to do with its strategic location, those cosmopolitan connections, and perhaps, although this is harder to see archaeologically, a different constellation of ideas and practices related to leadership at the site. So that's what we have to say today. We welcome correspondence or comments from you, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Amers and Dr. Graham, for your presentation. I think that when people hear the term resistance, we tend to think about massive war and genocide. I don't think that many of us think of resistance by staying true to one's heritage and culture. So we are grateful that you focused on resistance in such an inspiring way, because we can clearly see the staying power of heritage through our diverse Maya communities in Belize. So please, to our viewers, make sure to leave your questions in the comments for Dr. Amers and Dr. Graham. And of course, as we continue to roll out the presentations, be sure to leave your questions and comments there as well. Next up, we have our second presentation for this theme by Dr. Arianne Boileau, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is an FQRSC postdoctoral fellow at the Simon Fraser University, apologies. She earned her PhD from the University of Florida in 2021. She is an anthropological archaeologist studying the human-environment interactions through zooarchaeology, taphonomy, biomolecular and geochemical analysis, and ethnohistory. More specifically, she examines how and why indigenous peoples procured, consumed, transformed, and discarded animal resources in the pre-Columbian and post-European contact Maya world. She has worked in Belize since 2010 and participated in the Social Archaeology Research Program, Pakpiton Regional Archaeology Project, and the Lamanai Archaeological Project. In keeping up with our theme of resilience this session, we have Dr. Arianne's presentation titled Food Resilience on a Colonial Frontier, the Zooarchaeological Research and Community Engagement at Lamanai. Here is Dr. Arianne's presentation.
Hi, everyone. So today I will be presenting results from my dissertation research, and I will show how zooarchaeology, or the study of animal remains that are recovered from archaeological sites, can provide evidence for resilience and resource exploitation at the site of Lamanai in Belize during the colonial period. So the Spanish conquest and the subsequent colonization of the Maya area were a time of turmoil that impacted the social, political, and economic structure of Maya communities. But the colonial process in itself was heterogeneous, and this is a consequence of the geography of the Maya region, combined with strong resistance to Spanish conquest. So by 1545 and until the end of the 17th century, the Yucatan Peninsula could be divided into three zones. There was the thriving Spanish colony in northwest Yucatan, the unpacified territories to the southwest, and a semi-conquered buffer zone that corresponds more or less to modern Belize and the Mexican state of Quintana Roo. And what I find interesting is that the types and levels of Spanish contact and control shaped the experiences of the Maya that lived in these three different zones. And so in this context, I am asking, how did the Maya that lived in the frontier zone organize themselves and their communities under the conditions of Spanish colonialism? I am examining this particular question at the site of Lamanai. So Lamanai is a large Maya center located in northern Belize. The site stretches over 4 kilometers on the western shore of the New River Lagoon, and it covers 6 square kilometers. It was occupied for nearly 3,000 years, starting in the early Preclassic around 1500 BC to the colonial period in the 17th century. And I am interested in the last 200 years or so of that history, a time that is called the terminal post-classic to the early Spanish colonial transition. So during the late post-classic, Lamanai was a prosperous site and a major trading center in northern Belize. It became an encomienda under Spanish control in 1544, but the Spanish never resided at the site on a permanent basis. Interactions with the Spanish at Lamanai are evidenced by 2 Christian churches constructed at the site and a few European objects, but there's not much else. And that's because the Lamaneros, the people of Lamanai, they continued to use the same ceramic, lithics, and architectural types after Spanish conquest. And this is interpreted as evidence for relative stability in indigenous economic and political structures at the site. Lamanai appears to have been abandoned by 1650, barely 100 years after becoming an encomienda. So the faunal material from my project dates to the terminal post-classic to the early colonial period, and the sample comprises about 10,000 vertebrate and invertebrate specimens that were recovered from 4 domestic non-elite house lots, which are the red circles on the slide, as well as 3 elite structures that are likely forming a residential complex inside the blue circle. So I used these zooarchaeological data from these households to examine the extent to which indigenous practices at Lamanai were transformed by or resilient to Spanish colonial policies. But why use animal remains to study this particular question? Well, we know from previous faunal studies that the Maya used animals to express their social and political position within a community, that they exchanged animals through trade networks, and that they used them in ritual performances and sacrifices. And so animal remains in the archaeological record can serve as a proxy for economic, social, and political systems. But what can we expect to find at Lamanai in terms of animal use during the colonial period? So we know that in the conquered zone of northern Yucatan, many Maya communities were forced to abandon their traditional hunting practices in favor of raising European domesticated animals. But Maya communities in the borderlands where Lamanai was located continued to focus on local animal resources, suggesting greater resilience to the imposition of Spanish colonial policies. At Lamanai, I also expect to find continued use of local resources. But I also hypothesize that several factors, like tribute obligations to the Spanish or a population influx, may have stressed existing food production strategies during the colonial period, forcing the Lamaneros to change their food ways. So the first 2 methods that I used to examine change in animal use were taxonomic abundances and diversity indices. These zooarchaeological data indicate a decrease in diversity and equitability of exploited animal taxa from the post-classic to colonial times. And this suggests that even if the Lamaneros continue to exploit a diverse set of resources, they intensified their exploitation of a smaller number of animals. And the taxonomic abundances reveal that the Lamaneros continued to exploit the same taxa, but the focus changed from mammals and freshwater mollusks to freshwater turtles and fishes. And these are species that could be mass captured with nets and traps. With regard to terrestrial resources, their entries became more abundant, while the importance of dogs declined. This change in animal exploitation was reflected in habitat use. So I conducted a habitat fidelity analysis, and this assigns a value to animals based on the amount of time they spent in different habitats. And these habitat values are then multiplied by the abundance of each animal in the zooarchaeological assemblage. So the habitat fidelity analysis indicates a shift toward greater utilization of rivers, in this case, probably the New River Lagoon and adjacent areas, and also an increase in opportunistic hunting and gardens in agricultural fields over time. So the Lamaneros appear to have relied less heavily on domesticated species that are representative of residential areas after Spanish contact. European domesticated animals like pigs and chickens, they were always rare at Lamanai, suggesting that these animals were not widely used by the community as food. And this pattern contrasts with what was seen at the conquered zone of northern Yucatan, where chicken and pigs were readily accepted by the Maya, or at least imposed on them by the Spanish. I also used carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis to examine husbandry practices at Lamanai. So briefly, the ratio of isotopes of the same kind vary according to what we eat and the ecosystems in which we live. And as we grow, isotopes are ingested in water and food or incorporated in all body tissues. And so by measuring the ratios of different isotopes in bone and teeth, you can examine the diet of people as well as animals. So here I'm using carbon isotope analysis to determine the types and proportions of plants in an animal's diet. And I'm particularly interested in the consumption of maize, which was the main cultivar for the Maya. And you can see that there were two clusters. So the first cluster on the right are animals with a maize-enriched diet. And so this means that they were most likely intentionally fed by humans, and these animals are dogs and turkeys. And so the result for a dog is obviously not surprising because they lived among human settlements. They could be fed scraps or they could forage on their own. But the data about turkey is what's interesting because we know from prior studies at Lamanai and others in the Maya area that the Maya raised turkeys. And the results at Lamanai indicate that this practice continued into the colonial period. The second cluster on the left of the slide is formed of wild animals like deer, tapir, and turtles. And they all exhibit a diet expected of herbivores that mainly consumed forest vegetation, or in case of turtles, a river vegetation. It's also been proposed, based on ethnohistoric evidence, that the Maya possibly husbanded deer or that they raised fawns from infancy, but there's no evidence at Lamanai for the husbandry of wild animals. I also analyzed patterns of bone breakage to determine if the Lamaneros engaged in marrow extraction. So marrow extraction is a time-consuming activity, and it can be indicative of food stress. So fractures that are created by marrow extraction are called green bone fractures because they're made when the bone is green or fresh. And you can see that this type of fracture was more abundant in the early colonial deposits than they were before Spanish contact. So overall, these zooarchaeological and isotopic data point to some intensification in the use of animal resources during the early colonial period. The Lamaneros placed their emphasis on animals that could be mass captured, like freshwater turtles and fish, or that could be opportunistically hunted in gardens and agricultural fields, like deer, peccary, and armadillo. And so I also identified an intensification in two practices, which were turkey husbandry and marrow extraction from long bones. So what would explain the push toward resource intensification? Well, it's possible that Spanish tribute requirements placed a burden on the community, although it's pretty difficult to determine what the Lamaneros actually owed in tribute or how often they actually paid tribute because we actually don't have the historical documentation for Lamanai. But it is interesting that two possible tribute items, turkeys and fish, increased in abundance during the early colonial period, possibly to meet these new demands placed by the Spanish. The Lamanai population was also transformed by forced resettlement efforts by the Spanish. We're pretty certain of that. And so Renju Song has documented at Lamanai that weaning practices were extended and that dietary patterns in children became more heterogeneous during the colonial period. And so in this context, the increase in marrow cracking could suggest that some food insecurity was fulfilled with greater fat intake. The shift in animal use also suggests that less time was invested in animal procurement strategies, and this parallels findings by Darcy Wewell's study of non-elite colonial households at Lamanai. Wewell documented an increase in the presence of one-meal cooking pots during the colonial period, and this coincided with a decline in the more labor-intensive komals that we use for maize food preparation. So overall, what I see is that the changes in animal use during the colonial period were not a radical departure from what the Maya did before Spanish contact. There is change. The change is not dramatic. In fact, following what Kitty Emery has proposed before me for Lamanai, it can be argued that these transformations had their roots in post-classic practices that were already changing before the Spanish even arrived. And even more, by maintaining what could be considered quotation mark traditional post-classic foodways, the Lamaneros may have solidified the Mayaness in a time during which their identity was threatened by the new colonial regime and missionization efforts. And so the refocus on the more intensive exploitation of local resources would have provided economic stability to a community that had to rely on itself more than ever before. And this demonstrates resilience of this frontier Maya community that was Lamanai to the important social and political transformations brought about by Spanish colonialism. And this cultural resilience continues today with the people of Belize. And I've been fortunate to work with really wonderful people for the 3 years that I conducted research lab at Lamanai. And what was most impactful for me were the discussions I've had with these people, with the Indian church residents, the tour guides that passed through Lamanai, the staff members of the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve, and the owners of the gift shop at Lamanai. And really, I found it's really easy to engage in conversations about food and animals with people because, well, if you think about it, we all have to eat. And food is something that's very cultural and personal. And what transpired from these conversations is that the way of the past are echoing in the present. The people in Belize, they still raise animals, they still plant, they still fish, and they live in the same environments in which the ancient Maya lived. And let's not forget that there's some Maya that live today in Belize. And so it's been really interesting from these conversations to hear about, for example, how the hicatee, or what we also call the Central American river turtle, is still considered a delicacy today by many. And this is the most common turtle that I found at Lamanai. So you can see a persistence of a preference for a particular turtle over time. Or it's been really nice to be able to talk to people about what I find in the archaeological record, let's say particular species of fish or turtles that are present, and see that, these are still present in the lagoon today and that people would still fish them. And sometimes you also, learn a few things, a few tricks that are interesting, like, being with a tour guide that tells you, like, did you hear this? And like, what are you talking about? Like this, like something sound, that's a peccary. I'm like, oh, okay. And like, well, what do you do if you see a peccary? It's like, well, if you see like a squadron of peccaries, you better climb a tree because that could be dangerous. So it's these conversations that really make you feel that, people are still living here today and there's some, you can still engage with them about the work that you do. But so one of the things that I regret from my PhD is not involving more people, more community members on the Indian Church in my research. So I had 2 Indian Church residents actually help me sort through bones in the lab, but I haven't had a chance to do a lot more. And so I had plans before COVID to organize a talk/roundtable in Indian Church because I was hoping to present the results of my dissertation research. And this idea came from conversations that I've had in Spanish with, some of like the people that work at the reserve or that live in Indian Church, where they were like telling me how they know that we carry out research, but they don't really know what we actually discover, and they would be interested in these kind of findings. So it's not been possible for me to do this roundtable. I hope that I can do it in the future, but my current contribution to that is to create a poster that will be hung in the museum at the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve. And this poster will be both in Spanish and in English. So the poster is in development right now, so I can show it to you because it's not completed, but it is my hope that this will help showcase how resilient the Lamanais were in the face of Spanish colonialism. And it is my first step in mobilizing knowledge in the Indian Church community. And I hope to do much more in the future. I would like to thank all of these people and organizations for the support and the funding. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Arianne, for your wonderful presentation. I mean, talk about a unique outlook on resilience. I think we sometimes feel a disconnect with our ancestors, or that they were dramatically different from us. But when I see presentations such as yours, I am quickly reminded that humans will always find a way to survive and to progress while adapting to their environment. And I'm particularly thinking about your brief overview of the bone marrow extraction. I think that in today's day, many of us enjoy the marrow most after finishing up a meal. So I thought about that when I was listening to your presentation just now. But nevertheless, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. Up next and wrapping up our morning session is Dr. Alec McLellan. And Dr. Alec McLellan is currently a seasonal instructor at several universities in Ontario, Canada, including the University of Toronto. Trent University, Wilfrid Laurier University, and the University of Western Ontario. He is a research fellow at the Trent University Archaeological Research Centre. His research focuses on the development of pre-Columbian Maya civilization at Lamanai and Kakabish, two sites in northern Belize. He is interested in settlement patterns, paleo-environmental reconstructions, spatial analysis, geographic information systems, GIS, and early complex societies. Alec recently accepted a postdoctoral position at the University of New Brunswick as an Indigenous Engagement Coordinator. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. McLellan's presentation, Community Engagement and the Preservation of the Archaeological Record in the Periphery of Lamanai, Belize.
Hi, my name is Alec McLellan, and thank you for joining me. My presentation is focused on our ongoing efforts to preserve the archaeological record of the ancient Maya settlement surrounding Lamanai, a site in northwestern Belize. By engaging with members of several modern nearby communities, including Shipyard, Indian Creek, and Indian Church, we have started to raise awareness about the importance of the fields outside the civic ceremonial center of the site. Lamanai is a Maya center that has captivated the interest of professionals and non-professionals from many different positions and places in the world. It is known in the archaeological community for its extensive occupation history, which started as early as 1500 BC, continued through the famous Maya collapse in the 8th to 10th centuries, and became a seat of colonization by the Spanish in the 16th and 17th centuries, and finally by the English from the 18th century onward. A little less known are two of its neighboring sites, KULCHA, which is 5 kilometers northwest of Lamanai and consists of a small center with several pyramidal structures surrounding a central plaza, and Kakabish, a medium-sized center that is 10 kilometers northwest of Lamanai and consists of several plazas surrounded by large temples and range structures. These three centers of monumental architecture form a settlement system that I've referred to as the Greater Lamanai area. Today, I'm going to talk about the fields surrounding these great sites in what is commonly referred to in Maya archaeology as the periphery. Before I get to that, I want to talk about the area that is known and thought of as the archaeological site of Lamanai. The Civic Ceremonial Center is found in the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve, a 950-acre park devoted to the preservation, conservation, research, and protection of the natural and cultural environment. The main tourist sites, located on the map to the right, attract visitors year-round, with populations peaking from January to March. Although the number of tourists visiting Lamanai declined over the course of the pandemic, prior to 2019, the site frequently had over 200 visitors a day. Many of the modern communities that interact with Lamanai, whether it's tourists from far-flung countries or the residents of nearby towns and villages in Belize, they recognize the site by its extensive monumental architecture. They witness firsthand the High Temple, the Mask Temple, and the Jaguar Temple, three major structures that are protected by the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve. But the area we recognize as Lamanai represents only a small portion of the pre-Columbian people who inhabited the landscape in the past. The Lamanai Archaeological Reserve, found in the bottom right corner of the map, is surrounded by thousands of ruined structures. These structures are the houses of the commoners who supported the construction of the monumental architecture that tourists see every day. The fragile archaeological remnants of these populations fall outside the protection of the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve. It is this segment of the archaeological record that is threatened by destruction year after year as the land is developed for agricultural purposes. Thus far, we have identified 301 individual structures, many of which are formed into multi-structure plazuela groups, the common household arrangement found in ancient Maya societies. Two of the largest modern communities in the area are called Shipyard and Indian Creek. Shipyard, north of Lamanai and Kakabish, and Indian Creek to the south, are Mennonite settlements that have been expanding over the course of the last several decades, moving into areas previously covered by tropical broadleaf forest. The agricultural activities of the surrounding communities allow archaeologists to quickly identify and record evidence of past Maya settlement, especially if they are surveyed immediately after the removal of the forest. But after subsequent years of plowing, the archaeological record starts to degrade. In 1985, Shipyard was a small settlement with a number of camps arranged around central roads. In 1987, Shipyard had a population of only roughly 2,000 people spread out over less than 50 square kilometers. Most of the original community members immigrated to Belize, which was then known as British Honduras, in 1958. Indian Creek, which is shown on the map to the south, wasn't settled until 1988. By 1995, both communities had expanded towards Lamanai and Kakabish. Shipyard pushed south, removing large tracts of tropical jungle, replacing palm with corn, and turning forest into highly productive farmland. Indian Creek did the same, expanding in all directions and creeping closer to the areas that were once heavily populated by the ancient Maya. In 1999, demographic information from Belize showed that the Mennonites had a birth rate well above the national average, a statistic that predicted the expansion witnessed in the next 20 years. By 2005, Shipyard and Indian Creek covered over 150 square kilometers, with the only remaining forest found in a 10-kilometer transect between Lamanai and Kakabish. In the literature, we have referred to this area as under siege, as the Mennonite communities move closer to the Maya ruins, buying up new plots of land to transform the forest to agriculture. By 2015, the transect between Lamanai and Kakabish was conquered by the continued expansion of agriculturalists moving into the area, with only several small plots of land still under forest, and the Lamanai Archaeological Reserve, which has protected the forest and the Maya ruins for over 5 decades. Population estimates in 2018 show that the Indian Creek and Shipyard communities now contain over 5,000 people, over 100% increase over the preceding 4 decades. Since I began working in the area in 2010, I've been interacting with members of the various communities surrounding Lamanai and Kakabish, asking for permission to work in their fields and talking to them about the importance of the archaeology in the area. Some are interested in the artifacts and structures in their fields and engage with the past through site visits and observing us working in the fields. Others are less interested and carry out agricultural practices that can significantly damage, either intentionally or unintentionally, the archaeological record of the Maya in the area. One of the most damaging practices is agricultural chaining. This technique involves dragging a large, heavy metal chain between 2 front-end loaders to flatten and clear the landscape. It is highly destructive and turns a field marked by discrete ancient Maya residential houses into a mess of building debris and artifacts. In the image above, you can see a front-end loader resting on the remnants of an ancient Maya house. After agricultural chaining, you can see what the landscape looks like. In the foreground are the remains of a Plazuela group, flattened for agricultural purposes. This technique is not only damaging because the residential houses of the Maya usually contain the burials of the people that once lived there, but it becomes increasingly difficult to identify individual Maya structures and to reconstruct what the lives of the common Maya were like. Over the last 10 years, we have identified many of the field owners between Kakabish and Lamanai, many of which come from the communities of Shipyard and Indian Creek. We have made strong inroads into their communities and have tried to lessen the impact of agricultural techniques such as chaining. In many cases, larger structures in the fields are now avoided and left with forest cover. By fostering relationships with the culturally diverse and ethnically varied communities in the periphery of Lamanai, we are helping to raise awareness of the importance and vulnerability of the unique cultural heritage of the entire region. We've built strong and lasting relationships in the community. This picture was taken in 2016 with one of the field owners of Coco Chan. I spoke with him briefly several weeks ago to ask for his permission to do excavations in the Civic Ceremonial Center. He was interested, engaged, and his only concern was that we didn't impact any of the large trees that populated the site. In the coming field season, we will use drone technology to map and record evidence of ancient Maya structures in the periphery of Lamanai and Kakabish, and hopefully create a lasting 3D reconstruction of the landscape as it looks like in 2023, before continued work in the fields threatens to destroy portions of the archaeological record forever. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to everyone who made this project possible.
Thank you, Dr. McLellan, and thank you to all our presentations this morning. We are now entering our Q&A session for this morning, and I would like to invite all of our presenters to come on screen to share their to share their thoughts and, of course, add a little bit more insight on their presentations. But before we get into all, there are a few questions here in the comment section for all of our presenters this morning. But I would like to start off with a question that was asked in our previous session, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this session as well. And the question says, how can we create awareness on cultural heritage in Belize, which I think each of you have embedded a little bit in your presentation. So the floor is yours. Good morning.
I feel like that's a good question for Alec. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I am here. And I will field that question, sure. I mean, I think as far as the fields are concerned, the best way to do it is through education and by speaking to the members of the communities to show them what archaeology is being destroyed and how it's being affected by agricultural practices that they might not even be aware of the damage that's happening in the fields. And so just by speaking to people, by making yourself available to have those conversations, we can push forward the awareness of cultural heritage.
I would just add one more little thing. I mean, I think this conference is just a superb example of that. And I think that the BAS conference that happens in the summer, which attracts quite a lot of tour guides and local people, are really great examples. I try to participate in those as much as I can. I think with my work, which is sometimes quite technical about pottery, it's sometimes hard for people to engage. Although I think just the beauty of a lot of the pottery that I work with is interesting to people.
Yeah, just to add to that, you guys can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah, just to add to that, like, I think it's really that, like, talking to people, making yourself available. And something that I would add to that is to try to do it in not just English, but other languages as well. Because in Indian church, for example, a lot of the older members of the community, because they were refugees from Guatemala or Salvador, they don't speak English. And so if you want to be able to communicate with them, you also have to do it in their language, right? And so Belize is a multi-language country. And so even if we all do it in English, because that's often easier for us, I think we also have to extend ahead and do it, if possible, in other languages.
Definitely, and I can't wait to see your poster. By the way, I know that you pre-recorded it, but I was wondering if it was already done.
I'm doing it right now. I was just on a research trip, so I've had not a lot of time to do it, but it's done in collaboration with the Institute of Archaeology and the Florida Museum of Natural History. So can't wait for it myself.
Well, I have a few questions here in the comments section, and some of our audience members. I think this question here comes from James Bacon, and I believe it is directed at Dr. Amers. And he was wondering if any of your ceramics have correlation with the ceramics at Alton Ha.
Yeah, very strong connections. As a matter of fact, we mentioned in the presentation that there's an actual what we call a paste recipe, a way of making pottery that seems to have diffused from Alton Ha to Lamanai, I think in the Terminal Classic. That's Linda Howey's research. Stylistically, lots of similarities. They're not that far away as the crow flies, although, the rivers, et cetera, make it, I think, difficult to travel between them. But sure, no, there's a lot of stylistic connection. The big difference is that there's very little occupation in the Terminal Classic and almost none in the Post-Classic at Alton Ha. So prior to those periods, very similar, but there's just not much to compare in the later periods. It's interesting that the little bit of late Post-Classic material that it was found by David Pendergast at Alton Ha looks like Lamanai pottery. So yeah, strong connections.
Wonderful. I hope that answers your question, James. And I believe this next question is also for you, Dr. Jim. And it says, were the island burials face down as opposed to face up, placed in the same cardinal direction as those at Lamanai?
That is an excellent question for a physical anthropologist. I'm so specialized in pottery. I know that Dr. Graham would be able to answer that question, or Dr. Pendergast, and I know Dr. Graham wanted to be here today. Some of you may not know that while we were here in the summer, David Pendergast had a fall and had a medical crisis and is now back in London. He has very limited mobility. It's now about 6 p.m. in London. And Liz is his primary caregiver. She also has a new position, so she just couldn't make it. I know she could answer that in a second. I'm sure that Christine White and other physical anthropologists that have worked at the site could answer it. I just
believe
don't know.
Dr. Jim means that we will have to have a full session with Liz another day for her to answer that question. But this also would pertain to time period, the occupation of the site, how many persons were living, the traditions that they kept going, and so forth. But Liz, if you're out there and you're listening, this is your opportunity to have a session with us and to answer questions such as these. But thank you so much for your research nonetheless. But we move on to the next question, and this one is for Dr. Arianne. Dr. Arianne, how do I pronounce your last name? Because I feel like I botched it in the beginning. And
it's okay. It's French and has a lot of vowels. It's Boileau. My last name is Boileau.
Okay, so this question is for you. It says, how long is it until we see old world species in the archaeological record? For example, cattle. Do we see traditional processing on new species as a form of resistance and resilience?
So at Lamanai specifically, we actually don't really see old world species appearing. So, I said I looked at about 10,000 animal bones for my dissertation, and on those, there's about 7 bones that are not, or maybe 10 bones that are like pig or chicken. So it just don't make it to Lamanai. And I think it's because of this frontier that I talked about. It's a region that is, rebelling against the Spanish. They don't have good control over there. And the Spanish are in very few numbers in that area. So these animals just don't make it there. But in the region of Northwest Yucatan that I talked about, where the Spanish have better control, within about 15-20 years of them being established in the region, so they're really there, like as in Merida, for example, around 1540. By 1560, there is chicken and pigs pretty much everywhere in the communities. They arrive very, very quickly. And like pigs, for example, are not very different from turkeys in getting raised. So I think for the Maya, it's not like a big change. It's probably imposed on them by the Spanish because the Spanish want chickens, but it's not like a big change. And then pigs are pretty easy to raise because you can give them pretty much any food. So in that area, very quickly, you see cattle, and well, cattle takes a long time to arrive in Yucatan. But
Do
then
you think that?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you think that in light of newfound research in terms of like the colonial parts of Lamanai, that we would see more of these old world? No.
I don't think so. I mean, so in the British colonial period, which is later, yes, you definitely have them because at that point it's it's the British bringing these animals. But in the, let's say, Spanish colonial period, you don't. And even the work of Kitty Emery, for example, who worked at Lamanai before me, she also did not really identify any European animals.
Wow. That's a cool. I mean, I know that it says there's none, but that the fact that there isn't any kind of has a testimony to the interactions that were happening and the level of tolerance that the Maya had towards the Spanish. You could tell. But thank you so much. I think this next question here is for Dr. Alec, and it says here. Your work help educate and involves the local community. Oh, it's not a question, it's a comment. I'm sorry. But yes, nevertheless, congratulations on your work. And this one comes from our previous presenter, Cheong, and he is highlighting that community ownership and they will take care of it. But this one is a question. And this one comes from Amadita, who says, how can the community bring more awareness to issues brought by agriculture towards archaeological sites?
And this is a great question as well. And how can we go about it and communities do it? And again, I kind of just echo the same kind of statement I said before, where it just really has to do with going out into those communities. I mean, speaking with people from Shipyard, from Indian Creek, and seeing what they do in their fields, working alongside them, and just continue to build those kind of connections to show the different agricultural practices too. As I mentioned, some things like agricultural chaining isn't always used in every field. Only certain landowners do it. And so we could say easily to those landowners, just can we maybe not do that, or at least let us survey the fields prior to doing more destructive agricultural practices. So again, just reaching out to people and starting that dialogue.
Do you, because you work closer with Northern Belize, which has a bit more versatility in terms of cultural communities, that of different Maya communities, Mennonite communities, and so forth. How do you find the differences in relationships with agriculture and the archaeological sites? When you discuss with Maya communities about archaeology and the protection of Maya heritage, how do you begin to have that conversation and engage them with that?
Yeah, it usually just goes finding the people that own the fields to begin with, and then going and knocking on doors. Usually, that's how we do it, and we usually go with multi languages, as Arianne mentioned, being able to speak in Spanish and in English. And it would be nice to have a German speaker one time as well with the Mennonite communities. That would be great, but we haven't had that opportunity yet. But yeah, just talking to people again, that's all I really can do.
Yeah, I understand. I think it's one of it, it's after you talk to people. How do you get them to take your word for it, or to get you to understand the importance?
Yeah. And also being present, I mean, in these fields as well. We've had owners come up to us and look at what we're doing. We bring artifacts from the field to show them what we're going to be taking out of the field as well, so they know, what our goals are and what we intend to do with the material culture that's in those fields. And so, yeah, we've had people, watching us from afar. Sometimes they come into the field and they will walk it with us. We even had a carriage ride at one point. I mean, there's ways that you can, that engage with people just by working in the field and being present.
Thank you. This next question poses for Dr. Amers. Do you work directly with any modern Maya potters in the region? Are there movements towards traditional art we've seen in previous days around Lamanai?
A number of years ago, we were communicating a lot with David Magana, who's now deceased, and there was a professor who is also a professional pottery at one of the State University of New York schools, and I've forgotten his name right now, but he had actually started a project in San Antonio in the Belize Valley, trying to not only kind of reproduce some of the traditional pottery techniques for actually making the pots, but also very interestingly, I thought, recreating the slip technologies. Slips are like a thin clay that you use to color the surface of the pot, almost like a paint. And we know very little about how those were made. And he was investigating that, but that was, gosh, that might have been almost 10 years ago. I've lost touch with him. I'm not sure whether that's continuing. I would love to. I mean, that would be fabulous, right? I am not focused on the technology. That is usually in the realm of what is called petrography, looking at, actually what minerals and clays are in the pot and the technology of making it. I am very much focused on surface style. And so, but, still the pots can be replicated. And of course, Frank Zeeb and others who are sort of exploring traditional art. I'm really hoping that will be accelerate in Belize. There's some of that going on in Mexico. I'm not sure if that's going on in Guatemala, but that would be fantastic. I think it not only would be culturally valuable, but also economically valuable, right? You could sell replicas, and I think there's all kinds of potential for that. But I think it's not terribly well developed right now in Belize, anyway.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Frank, because I was going to use him as an example. But the reality is that when we think about works like this, he is probably the only name that comes to mind. And that is just one person from one community where we have several. So I guess it poses the question of what can we do to inspire young members of these communities to uphold traditions and to keep in light that way of resiliency, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we have to promote the idea that this is something that people should be proud of, right? It's an incredible Maya pottery is one of the world's great pottery traditions, like globally. And so I just don't know if a lot of local and indigenous people are really aware of how important this tradition is. And I think if we could I try to convey that, but I'm not sure how much it sinks in and how viable it seems to ordinary people looking at how to make a living and that sort of thing. So I guess we just have to show people there's value in it, inspire a pride that would encourage people to explore the technology.
Perhaps, access to material, maybe, because we do see people carrying out the traditional textile use, the clothing, the bagware, and so forth, the use of the jipijapas and so forth, but not necessarily seeing ceramics. So, yeah.
So, well, that's ironic, isn't it? Because clay is everywhere. And I remember when I was working at Lamanai in 2006 directly with Linda Howie, who studies the production and the technology of pottery. And she was talking about smectite clays. It's a particular kind of clay that's found around the site of Lamanai. And I had a guy from University College London, an undergraduate student, working with me. And he was convinced that you could, make pots out of that clay. And I remember Linda saying, smectite, Stephen, smectites, the terrible clays for pots. And so what Stephen did is he went out, dug up some of this clay, processed it, and fired it in the back of Doña Blanca's house, an Indian church, and made little pots. So he showed even the expert was kind of wrong that you can actually produce clay with this pots with this not very good clay. So really the resources are not the issue. Clay is everywhere. And so you have to process it, and there's skill involved in what you put into the clay for certain properties. You can't just dig up clay and make a pot. You generally have to process it and add materials to it. But really, this is one of the world's oldest, and I don't want to say basic technologies, but it is a technology that has been invented independently in many parts of the world with many types of clay. So I don't think it's really the materials that are the issue. It's that there isn't a cultural value on that. And of course, why aren't people making Maya pots anymore? Because they're replaced by plastic and metal. And so, that's what happened in Guatemala, right? And so in the 70s, people were trying to, Dr. Hill and others were trying to record and preserve those technologies as they were replaced by plastic and metal. And so that's the other thing, right? We don't really use pottery for a lot of functions aside from serving anymore. And so people have to see that there's a value in pottery beyond just the utilitarian.
That makes for a completely different light on how we can begin to inspire that kind of change, and I guess to uphold traditional knowledge to present day communities. But it sounds like you'll have to come back as well, Dr. Jim, and have another conversation with us here.
You may not be able to get rid of me. I'm a bit of a pest, so
we
happy
don't
to come
want
back.
to. This is information that I think our viewers don't get a chance to hear this. Because when we think about archaeology or when we think about these things, we think it's only for the archaeologists and not for the community. And so if you were to come back and talk, if you want to nerd out about pots, we can nerd out about pots.
I love to nerd out about pots. I'm here for 6 weeks nerding out about. I'm in Orange Walk right now, nerding out. I'm sitting on a box of Lamanai pottery right now.
I just assumed everybody was in their various time zones, but
no, I'm right here in Orange Walk.
Well, please keep dry because there is a storm coming, and be safe. But we move on to another question that I think was brought forth a while ago as well, and then this was also posed by James Bacon, and this is for any of our presenters. Does this mean that emergency or salvage archaeology should be given greater priority to excavate and record what exists now before it is lost? I'll have maybe Dr. Arianne or Dr. McLellan can shed light.
Yeah, I can say something about this. I mean, you see the difference between Lamanai, the civic ceremonial core. I mean, it's protected. It has the reserve. It's been protected for years. But the outside of that area is very much almost lawless as far as the archaeological record is concerned. I mean, people can do whatever they want out there. It's up to them whether they preserve the record or not. And also, even the sites where there's monumental architecture, like Cocochan and Kakabij, those are filled with holes from just people digging and looting within the sites. So again, I think that the areas that are more sensitive should be given priority over some of the areas that are protected and don't face the same kind of threats on a daily basis.
Dr. Arianne?
I don't know if I have anything to add to that because I agree with it. I mean, it's really just that. Like, I think we should possibly prioritize more like things that we know are being destroyed. But the thing is, the entire country of Belize has structures and was inhabited by the Maya. And so we can't be like archaeologists, and the Institute of Archaeology can't be everywhere protecting everything all at the same time. And we have limited resources. So I think that, yes, perhaps they should give greater priority to things that are being destroyed, but we can only do so much, unfortunately. So I think that projects like what Alec is doing to try to, not look only at the ceremonial centers, but also outside and places that are threatened by agriculture, to be able to document them and preserve them now is the way to go, definitely.
If I could just
go ahead.
If I could just jump in and say one more thing, I absolutely agree that the kind of stuff that Alec is doing is so important, right? Trying to protect that stuff that is really in danger. I think there's another kind of salvage we need to talk about, and that is collections, right? Stuff that has already been excavated in storage. And this is a global problem in archaeology. It's certainly a problem in Mesoamerica and in Belize. The idea of archaeology is so focused on excavation, and people are so excited by excavation and so interested in excavation, and I get it, right? It's exciting. But what happens is material is excavated, it's put into storage, and it's not analyzed. And you might as well not have excavated it, right? And in conditions like a lot of sites in Belize that don't have very good storage, you get hurricanes, you get bats, you get termites, you get mice, they destroy the collections. And so we've spent 10 years at Lamanai trying to raise money to store the collections. And basically, it's impossible to get money from National Science Foundation or National Geographic to just store and curate materials. And it's an international global archaeological scandal. And I'm a little radical on this. I think that actually the Institute of Archaeology should consider not allowing people to do more excavations at a site until they've shown that they've made a serious movement towards at least storing and curating in a very secure way and analyzing and ultimately publishing material. It's just a big problem in archaeology, this focus on excavation and the funding of excavation, whereas you can't get money to actually look at the stuff that's been excavated. Sorry, I'll get off my high horse.
No, absolutely. And I was just about to ask and keep the engagement going in terms of how do we engage governmental entities, and how do we bring these ideas into policy? How can the regular civilian community do that? That was going to be, but you brought it forth in full force, Dr. Jim. And this also goes in light with a question that a student had posed to me a while ago when we were doing excavations up in the north. Where do these go? And it was a very, very simple question that I did not have the answer to at the time because it was not my project. I was simply just there to show what the archaeologist was doing. And the question was very simple about what happens next. So we're helping here. We're looking at these things going into their proper bags and they're put up for analysis. When am I going to see this again? And the fact that there are several ways to answer that question without having one conclusive answer is a little bit frightening. And so the question that I wanted to pose was, where do you see the future of archaeology going?
I mean, for me personally, as a zooarchaeologist, I basically only work on excavated collections. I don't partake very much in excavation, actually. I'm often more of a lab person. And so to me, like, it has been a treasure trove of many collections that have been looked at like partially or not at all, or like there's just a lot of work to be done. And some of these collections are in Belize, some of them are abroad. For example, at the Florida Museum of Natural History that has a lot of loan agreements with the Institute of Archaeology here in Belize, or other countries like Mexico and Guatemala. And so I think a lot of the future is in these collections, make sure that they are inventoried properly, stored properly, and then examined, and find students and professors who want to work on these collections. There is a ton of work to be done still on everything that's already excavated, like Jim just said. So I think the future is going that way. And, and it's all these collections that already exist that also allow us to work with what I would call like is the revolution of technology in archaeology. So I also do isotope analysis and ancient DNA analysis, and it's using these collections that already exist that we're able to do this type of work that provide us a new and different light on the past. So to me, this is like one part of the answer, right? Because I think there are many different avenues that we can take.
I'm glad that you brought that part up because we don't have that kind of resource here in Belize. So when our students and particularly our students that mainly are just volunteering or seeing it for the first time, they don't know that part. So perhaps this is another way that we could introduce a new, not a new, but a different way of educating students about archaeology, because they want to get to see the cool stuff, right? Everybody wants to be Indiana Jones, and they don't see what happens after. And so maybe that could be a new community engagement project.
Yeah, it's a major a misperception that I often find is that people assume that when we dig things up, we export them to Canada, the US, Europe, whatever. Whereas generally now we only export things that need some specialized analysis that can't be done here. We obviously need to get permission to do that. So really very little stuff is exported these days. But that raises this, which is good, except that it raises the issue of what do you do with it in Belize because there's so much of it. So the dream, the ideal is like they have in Mexico, they have these places throughout the country where they store ceramics and other artifacts, centralized storage managed by the government. I recognize that the resources aren't here for that in Belize, but that would be the ideal situation because storage and curation at individual sites is so uneven and so problematic.
Dr. Alec, the floor is yours. Future of archaeology.
Thank you very much. And I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, archaeologists, usually in their professional code of ethics, they're supposed to look after these collections. They're supposed to store them properly. I mean, even from my perspective in Ontario, if I take a license out on a site, it is my responsibility to deal with the collection and make sure that it is held in perpetuity for future archaeologists to look at. And so, you're right that there's issues with this and it's not being done correctly, and where the future of archaeology is going, it's happening. I'll give a perspective just from Ontario. It's happening so quick here in Ontario, the archaeology, that there's just large places that are being completely excavated or surveyed, and it'll turn to where the focus goes from excavation to these collections, because you're not going to have anywhere else to excavate. It'll already have been cleared by archaeologists. And there were, even this past year, there was something like 3,000 sites that were excavated. I mean, the rapidity and the speed of the industry is going to cause lots of issues, and it happens too fast, I think. So the future of archaeology, yeah, maybe it will switch from excavation and survey and start looking at these massive collections that exist that people haven't been spending the time to look at.
I mean, I think that a lot of the collaborations within government entities in Belize, particularly universities and different community tourism, cultural entities, probably need to collaborate a little bit more. We had this conversation, I think, on our first day of KULCHA, where we're trying to find ways to get students involved, because a very simple example, I think, would be whenever I host my anthropology class, students say, I don't know what this is. I thought that anthropology is just archaeology, and now you're talking to me about all of these other things. And so the reality is that archaeology is in their faces. They see NICH, they see Lamanai, they see all of these places, but they don't understand it, and they don't understand the heritage connection. They don't understand the work behind it. And so perhaps more education needs to be done. And then maybe then we can start talking about storage and how people can see it. Because even if you store it in a space, and we have a museum, we have houses of culture, they still are not viewed by the public as often as you would want. So maybe that is the step in the right direction. I don't know. But final questions for our panel. And I think that someone was asking about funding and who pays for storage. So I think that it was Carolyn Dawson. Yes. What does the budget look like for a future storage secure site?
I mean, it should be part of every archaeological project's budget. Storage should be part of that, right? But unfortunately, I don't think people ever really put enough money into that. And then in terms of finding external sources, forget it. We've tried, right? National Science Foundation, they will not fund unless there's excavation associated. National Geographic wants nice photos. Do they think they want photos of metal boxes with Lamanai sherds in them, right? There's no money for this stuff because it doesn't engage people. Curation does not engage people. And so I don't know how to solve that. That's been a major issue in my career. My birthday a few years ago, my friends gave me money towards metal boxes for Lamanai, right? That's how desperate. So it's just it's a problem in archaeology.
And the other thing is, when you want to put money like in a budget, let's say for an NSF grant, like I got one for my dissertation research. I put some money into curation, but like the amount of money that they will, I think, see as sensible for curation is very far from how much money we would actually need to properly curate everything. And if let's say I do my dissertation projects, I'm looking at animal remains, then the money that I'm supposed to be putting in there is only for the curation of what is used for my project. So you can't, they won't allow it to be for things that were done before that have nothing to do with the project that I'm applying for, right? So it makes it very difficult then to have these large lines of budget for curation. And I think it's because that's a skewed view of how much money it actually takes to curate artifacts for longevity.
Yeah, I'm here for 6 weeks doing analysis of Lamanai ceramics. There's no way to get money for that. I've tried for years. I'm spending my own money, right? So archaeology, it's my profession, but it's also my very expensive hobby, right? Again, all I can say is this is a scandal, really, I think, in archaeology, not just in Belize, but really globally.
And, just to, I guess the last point is if we would want, to create in Belize, let's say, centralized curation facility, that's millions of dollars, right? To be able to build it, have the you need to staff it. So you need people that is there for that. You need to build it to create it properly. You need to bring then everything from all the places in Belize to this one centralized place. You need to inventory it. It's a huge project that would be very, very expensive. And I don't think that these resources exist at the moment, right? It's a beautiful dream.
Artifacts store the same either. Yeah.
So.
I think that I opened up a can of worms. I apologize. But I also feel that it's not a widely discussed part of archaeology when it comes to funding, when it comes to securing storage, budgeting, and so forth. And particularly for students and civilians in Belize, when they say, "Miss, how much you get paid for work on an site?" And I say, it is a labor of love. I make $0 and 0 cents performing archaeology because we love it and we want to do it and we want people to see it. And then that doesn't register, right? So when I say, "Oh, we don't get paid for archaeology," it kind of lessens the interest. They don't want to do a job that they might not get paid for or not might get compensated for well. So final thoughts on how we can make it better, because we have to close. We're out of time.
We need to pressure the funding agencies like National Science Foundation and National Geographic and all these other organizations that pay for excavations but don't pay for curation and analysis. It's as simple as that. But how do you pressure National Science Foundation? How do you pressure National Geographic? I don't know.
Dr. Alec and Dr. Arianne, final thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, there's no clear, easy question or answer to this. I wish there was, and the collections keep growing, so I don't know.
I mean, I think people in the past didn't really think. I mean, I'm assuming something here, but that, to think about, for example, storage and money for that intergrant. So I think it's part of us, to try to make this something that's important in our grants, so we can try to bring some money to the country. And then something that we keep talking about is community engagement, right? So to continue to engage with the public, with the broader audiences about the type of work that we do, to involve them in the type of research that we do so that people continue to care and just raise awareness, right? So, like the symposium.
Thank you so much. And I do think that it is food for thought. And I just want to remind our audience that if you missed any of these lovely presentations, any of the days, today, this morning, yesterday, and the day before, that they are all going to be published on the Heritage Education Network Belize's YouTube page. So if you ever want to go back to see Dr. Amers, Dr. Alex, and Dr. Arianna's presentation, you are free to 100% do so. Our panelists, thank you so much for being here this morning. Our audience, thank you so much for sticking around for our last day of the symposium. And we are going to take our lunch break, and we will be back at 1 p.m. sharp with our final session for today. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.